I didn't lose my scholarship the day my stepmother signed it over to her daughter. I lost it the moment I realized no one in that house ever planned for me to have a future. By the time I sat down in that stadium, staring at 4 empty VIP seats with my last name printed on them, I already knew they wouldn't come. They hadn't shown up for anything that mattered to me before. So why would graduation be any different? What I didn't expect was how quiet it would feel. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just empty. Like something had already been decided long before I ever walked across that stage. If you're listening right now, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always read every comment. And if stories like this hit a little too close to home, consider subscribing. Not because you have to, but because you understand. Now let me take you back to how it started. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 22 years old, and for most of my life, I learned to measure my worth in silence. We lived in a 2-story house just outside Columbus, Ohio. White siding, trimmed hedges, the kind of place that looks stable from the outside. My father worked long hours at an insurance firm, always tired, always distracted. And then there was my stepmother, Diane. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She controlled things quietly: finances, decisions, outcomes. And somehow, every decision always seemed to land in favor of her daughter, Lily. Lily was 2 years younger than me, confident in a way I never learned to be. She had this way of walking into a room like it already belonged to her. New phone every year, private tutors, dance lessons that cost more per month than my entire school supplies. Budget? I wasn't ignored exactly. I was managed, given just enough to function, never enough to grow. And then there was the scholarship. It came in a thick envelope, the kind you recognize instantly. Full academic coverage to a state university, tuition, housing, everything. I remember holding it in my hands at the kitchen table, the paper slightly heavier than normal, like it carried weight beyond just ink. For a moment, I thought things might finally change. I thought maybe this would be the one thing no one could take from me. I was wrong. A week later, I walked into that same kitchen and saw my stepmother sitting across from my father, a folder open between them. Lily was there too, smiling in a way that didn't feel like happiness. It felt like confirmation. Diane didn't look up right away. She just adjusted the papers. Camille, precisi. We've made a decision, she said. No build-up, no hesitation. Your sister needs this opportunity more. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. They had transferred the scholarship, paperwork signed, funds redirected, my name erased like it had never been there. I looked at my father. He didn't meet my eyes. He just nodded once. Like this was reasonable. Like this was fair. Lily said nothing. She didn't have to. Everything had already been decided. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It just went quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask them to reconsider. I understood. They chose her, so I chose something else. I chose to remember everything. I stopped expecting fairness after that morning. But I did start paying attention. It is a strange shift. The moment you realize you are not part of the plan, You begin to notice details you used to ignore. The way my stepmother kept every document in labeled folders, stacked neatly in a locked cabinet near the dining room. The way my father signed things without reading them twice. The way Lily never asked questions because she never had to. I watched everything. I remembered everything. The scholarship email had arrived at exactly 9:14 inches the morning. I knew because I had refreshed my inbox 3 times before it appeared. The subject line was still burned into my memory: Full Academic Merit Award. I printed it that same day, placed it in a clear plastic sleeve, and slid it into my backpack like it was something fragile, something temporary. I did not know then how right I was. After they transferred it, the house did not change. That was the part that surprised me the most. No attention, no argument, no acknowledgement that anything had been taken from me. Dinner was still served at 6. The television still played softly in the background. Lily still talked about her plans as if they had always been hers. I sat there, nodding when necessary, answering when spoken to. I said nothing. But I started building something they could not see. My first job was at a grocery store 3 miles from our house. Evening shifts, 4 hours at a time, stocking shelves and ringing up customers who never looked at me twice. Minimum wage, just over $7 an hour. It was not much, but it was mine. I opened a checking account in my own name 2 weeks later. I remember the bank clerk asking if my parents would be co-signing. I said no before she even finished the sentence. From there, it became routine. School during the day, work in the evening, homework after midnight. I learned how to stretch time the way other people stretch money. 5 hours of sleep felt like enough. Coffee became a necessity, not a choice. I stopped telling anyone what I was doing. Not my father, not my stepmother, not even teachers who asked why I looked tired all the time. It was easier that way. Silence had always been expected of me. Now it was something I controlled. Lily, on the other hand, moved forward exactly as planned. New laptop, private prep courses, application consultants who charged more per hour than I made in a week. I overheard my stepmother once, standing in the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear. "We want to make sure she stands out," she said. "We have invested a lot in her future." Invested. The word stayed with me because it meant something very specific. It meant they believed she would return value. It meant I was not worth the same calculation. That night, I went back to my room, closed the door quietly, and opened my laptop. I searched for every scholarship database I could find. Local, state, national, anything that did not require a parent's signature, anything that did not pass through their hands. I filled out applications one by one, careful, precise, double-checking every line the way my stepmother checked her paperwork. If they were going to treat my future like a transaction, then I would learn the system better than they did. I did not need their approval. I needed results. And for the first time in my life, I was not waiting for someone to give me permission. The first acceptance email came in at 2:07 inches the morning while I was sitting at the small desk in my room, the one with a loose leg that wobbled every time I leaned too hard on it. I had fallen asleep with my laptop open, a half-finished application still on the screen, when the notification sound pulled me back. For a second, I did not move. I just stared at the subject line. reading it over and over again to make sure I was not imagining it. Congratulations, Emily Carter. It was not a full scholarship. It was $5,000, renewable, conditional on maintaining a high grade point average. To most people, it would not have meant much. To me, it was proof that I could still claim something that had my name on it. I did not celebrate. I did not print it out or tell anyone. I clicked the acceptance link, closed the laptop, and went back to sleep like it was just another task completed. That became the pattern. One acceptance turned into two, then three, small amounts at first. 2,000 here, 3,500 there. A local foundation, a state program, a private donor I would never meet. Each one required essays, transcripts, recommendations. I wrote them all at the same desk. Late at night, the glow of the screen, the only light in the room. I learned how to tell my story without sounding like I was asking for sympathy. I learned which words carried weight and which ones did not. By the end of senior year, I had pieced together enough funding to cover most of what I needed. Not all, but enough to move forward. At home, nothing changed. Lily received a large envelope one afternoon and opened it at the kitchen counter, with my stepmother standing beside her. There were smiles, quiet excitement. A phone call placed immediately after. She got it, Diane said into the receiver, her voice steady but satisfied. Everything is confirmed. I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water, listening without turning around. I did not need to see the papers to know what they said. I had already memorized them once. Later that evening, Lily walked past me holding a new folder. Thick, organized, labeled with her name in neat black ink. She did not look at me. She did not thank me. She did not acknowledge anything at all. And that was the moment I understood something even more clearly. It was never about whether I could succeed. It was about whether they believed I deserved to. I dried my hands, turned off the faucet, and walked back to my room. On my desk, there was a growing stack of emails, confirmations, and award letters saved carefully in a digital folder only I could access. I opened it, scrolled through each one slowly, and then added the newest acceptance to the list. I did not need a folder on the kitchen table. I did not need their signatures. I was building something they could not take, piece by piece, decision by decision. And they still had no idea. Senior year moved faster than I expected. Not because anything became easier, but because I stopped waiting for things to change. My days became structured down to the minute. School from 7:30 in the morning until 2:15 in the afternoon. Then a quick bus ride to the grocery store. 4-hour shifts under fluorescent lights. And homework that stretched late into the night. I learned how to focus in short bursts, how to memorize information while standing, how to write essays during 15-minute breaks. It was not sustainable in the long term, but I was not thinking about long term. I was thinking about getting through each day without falling behind. At school, something began to shift, though not in a way anyone at home would notice. My teachers started to recognize patterns, consistent grades, perfect attendance. Assignments turned in early, not late. One afternoon, my guidance counselor, Mrs. Hernandez, asked me to stay after class. She sat across from me with a folder open, pages neatly organized, tabs marking sections I had never seen before. "Emily, have you considered applying for the academic honors distinction at graduation?" she asked. I looked at her for a second, unsure how to respond. That program was reserved for the top students in the class, the ones with near-perfect records and strong recommendations. I had never pictured myself in that category. Not because I was not capable, but because no one had ever suggested it before. "I do not think I qualify," I said carefully. She slid the folder toward me, turning it so I could see the numbers clearly printed across the page. Grade, point average, test scores, extracurriculars, work hours documented through school verification forms. "You more than qualify," she said. "You are one of the strongest candidates we have this year." For a moment, I did not know what to say. Not because I was surprised by the numbers, but because someone had finally said them out loud. I nodded once. "Then I will apply," I said. That night, I filled out the application at the same desk, the same dim light, the same quiet room, but this time felt different. Not easier, just clearer. At home, Lily's college plans became more visible, brochures stacked on the counter, conversations about campus tours and housing deposits. My stepmother moved through it all with the same calm precision, checking lists, making calls, confirming details. One evening, I overheard her speaking to my father in the living room. "Everything is aligned," she said. "Lily will have every advantage." My father responded with a quiet agreement, the sound of a pen tapping lightly against the table. I stood in the hallway for a second, listening, then turned and walked back to my room. I did not interrupt. I did not correct anything, because for the first time, I understood something their plan did not include me, but my future did not depend on their plan anymore. And by the time graduation came, that difference was going to matter. The application for academic honors did not feel like a turning point when I submitted it. It felt like another form, another deadline, another quiet step in a process no one at home would ever acknowledge. I filled it out the same way I had filled out everything else, carefully, line by line, double-checking every number, every word, every date. There was a section that asked about external responsibilities, and I listed my work hours without adding explanation. 20 hours a week, sometimes more. There was a section for personal statements, and I wrote about discipline, about consistency, about building something without support. I did not mention my stepmother. I did not mention the scholarship. I kept it clean, factual, controlled. When I clicked submit, I did not feel relief. I just closed the laptop and moved on to the next assignment. Weeks passed without any update. At home, the focus shifted entirely to Lily's future. Acceptance letters arrived in thick envelopes, stacked neatly on the counter like they were part of a display. My stepmother opened each one with measured excitement, reading the details out loud, discussing rankings, campus size, internship opportunities. My father listened, occasionally asking questions, occasionally nodding, always present in a way he had never been for me. I sat at the edge of those conversations, invisible but close enough to hear everything. One evening, Lily mentioned orientation dates, her voice light, confident, certain. They said I should prepare early. She said, "Housing fills up fast." My stepmother responded immediately. "We will handle it." She said, "Everything is already in motion." I noticed the phrase, "already in motion." It was the same tone she had used months earlier. Sitting at the kitchen table with that open folder, the same calm certainty that nothing needed to be questioned. I did not react. I simply finished my dinner, placed the plate in the sink, and walked back to my room. On my desk, my laptop was already open. Another email had come in earlier that afternoon. I had not read it yet. I clicked it slowly, scanning the first line, then the second. "We are pleased to inform you." I paused there, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to control the moment. Academic honors distinction. Selected. Ceremony participation. Required. Additional recognition to be announced during graduation proceedings. I read that last sentence twice. Additional recognition. It was vague. Intencional. Something meant to be revealed later. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply saved the email, added it to the same folder, and closed the screen. In the hallway, I could still hear Lily and my stepmother talking about campus tours, about move-in dates, about a future that had been carefully constructed for her. I sat down at my desk, folded my hands together, and stared at the wall for a few seconds. Then I opened my notebook and wrote down the date of graduation. I circled it once. That was the moment everything would come together. Not for them. For me. They had made their decision months ago. Now it was just a matter of time before they saw the result. After that email, I stopped thinking in terms of possibility and started thinking in terms of timing. Everything I did became more deliberate. I tracked deadlines on a small calendar taped to the edge of my desk, marking each day with a thin black pen, counting backward from graduation like it was a fixed point I needed to reach with precision. School continued as expected. Assignments, exams, group projects that I mostly completed alone. Teachers nodded when I answered questions. Classmates occasionally asked for help, but no one really saw the full picture. That was fine. I was not building this for recognition in a classroom. I was building it for something larger. One afternoon, Mrs. Hernandez called me into her office again. This time, there was no folder on the table, just a single envelope, cream-colored, sealed, placed directly in front of me. "This came in for you," she said. Her tone was steady, but there was something different in the way she looked at me. Not curiosity, not concern, respect. I picked up the envelope slowly, feeling the weight of it, the thickness of the paper inside. For a second, I did not open it. I just held it there, measuring the moment the same way I had learned to measure everything else. Then I broke the seal. Inside was a formal letter, printed on heavy stock, the kind used for official announcements. I read it once, then again. Slower. Selected for commencement recognition. Top academic distinction. Invited to participate in a special segment during the ceremony. My name was printed clearly in the center of the page. Not hidden, not redirected, Not transferred. Mine. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. "Thank you," I said. She nodded once. "You earned it," she replied. I left her office without saying anything else. At home, the rhythm had not changed. Lily's plans continued to expand. More conversations about housing deposits, class schedules, campus events. My stepmother moved through it all with the same calm efficiency, checking off items on lists no one else could see. That evening, I passed by the dining room and noticed a familiar folder sitting on the table. The same type, the same structure. I did not stop. I did not open it. I did not need to. Whatever was inside belonged to them. What I was holding belonged to me. In my room, I placed the envelope next to my laptop, aligned it with the edge of the desk so it would not slide. Then I sat down and opened my calendar again. Graduation was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of routine, of silence, of moving forward without interruption. I marked each day as it passed, one line at a time, steady, controlled. Nothing about my life looked different from the outside. Same house, same schedule, same quiet presence at the dinner table. But underneath it, everything had already shifted. They believed the outcome had been decided months ago. They believed the story was already written. I closed my notebook, turned off the light, and lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. I did not feel nervous. I did not feel uncertain. I felt ready. Because when that day came, I was not going to explain anything. I was going to let them see it for themselves. The final week before graduation did not feel dramatic. It felt precise. Every morning started the same way. Alarm at 6. The soft hum of the house still quiet. The air carrying that early summer warmth that settles in before the sun fully rises. I moved through my routine without rushing, without hesitation. Clothes laid out the night before. Bag packed. Calendar checked one last time, even though I already knew every date by memory. At school, everything shifted into ceremony mode. Caps and gowns distributed in the gym. Rows of students trying them on, adjusting tassels, taking pictures in clusters that formed naturally between people who had always belonged together. I stood at the edge of it, holding my gown folded over my arm, watching for a moment before stepping aside. I did not need a picture. I already knew what this meant. Later that afternoon, there was a rehearsal in the auditorium. Names were read in order, seats assigned, instructions repeated carefully so no one would make a mistake on the actual day. When they reached my name, there was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable, but not long enough for anyone else to question. The coordinator looked up, checked a separate list, then nodded. "You will remain seated after your name is called," she said quietly. "There will be additional instructions during the ceremony." I nodded once. No questions. No reaction. I had already read the letter. I already knew. At home, the energy was different, but not for me. Lily's departure was approaching, and everything revolved around it. Suitcases lined up near the hallway, tags attached, lists checked and rechecked. My stepmother moved between rooms with that same controlled pace, confirming reservations, reviewing schedules, adjusting details no one else noticed. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table while they discussed move-in dates. "We should leave early," my father said. "Traffic could be unpredictable." My stepmother agreed immediately. "We cannot risk delays," she replied. I looked down at my plate for a second. Then back up. "Graduation starts at 10. I said. My voice was calm, steady, almost neutral. My father glanced at me briefly, then back at his phone. "We will see," he said. 2 words. Not a promise, not a commitment, just enough to close the conversation. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. That was the only time I mentioned it. The next morning, I placed my cap and gown carefully on the back of my chair, smoothing the fabric so it would not wrinkle. On my desk, the envelope was still there, aligned perfectly with the edge, untouched since the day I received it. I picked it up, opened it again, and read the letter one more time. Slower this time, letting each word settle exactly where it belonged. Then I folded it back, placed it inside, and set it down outside. I could hear the faint sound of Lily's voice, talking about her schedule, her plans, her future. I sat there for a moment, listening without reacting. Then I stood up, turned off the light, and walked out of the room. I did not need them to show up. I needed them to see. Graduation morning arrived without announcement. Just the steady light of early summer filtering through the blinds and the quiet sound of the house already in motion. I woke up before my alarm, not because I was nervous, but because my body had already adjusted to the timing. 6 o'clock. Same as every other day. I got dressed slowly, carefully, pressing each fold of the gown flat with my hands before placing it over my shoulders. The fabric felt heavier than I expected, not physically, but in a way that settled across my chest and stayed there. Downstairs, the kitchen lights were on. My stepmother stood by the counter with a travel mug in her hand, keys placed neatly beside it. My father was already checking his phone, scrolling through something I could not see. Lily sat at the table, her suitcase by the door, talking about orientation check-in times like it was the only thing that mattered today. No one mentioned the ceremony. Not directly. Not even in passing. I poured a glass of water, took a sip, and set it down quietly. "I am leaving in 10 minutes, I said. My voice did not change. It did not need to. My stepmother glanced at the clock, then back at Lily. "We have a schedule," she replied. "We cannot adjust it now." I nodded once. That was enough. I picked up my bag, adjusted the cap in my hand, and walked toward the door. My father looked up briefly. "Good luck," he said. 2 words. Measured. Distant. I paused for half a second, then continued walking. "Thank you," I said. Outside, the air was warm, the kind of morning that carries a quiet stillness before the day fully begins. I drove myself to the stadium, hands steady on the wheel. The road familiar in a way that required no thought. Parking was already filling up when I arrived. Rows of cars stretching across the lot. Families stepping out together, adjusting ties, smoothing dresses, holding cameras. I walked past them without stopping. moving toward the entrance with the same controlled pace I had practiced for months. Inside, the stadium was already loud. Not chaotic, just full, conversations overlapping, footsteps echoing against concrete, the distant sound of music playing through speakers being tested. I found my seat by counting rows, checking numbers twice to be sure. 4 chairs behind me were marked with reserved signs, white cards placed carefully against the backs, my last name printed in bold black letters, Carter. I looked at them for a moment, then sat down. Students around me shifted, adjusted gowns, laughed quietly with people who had always been part of their story. I rested my hands on my lap and looked forward. The ceremony had not started yet, but everything was already in place. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and checked the time. 10 minutes until it began. I turned the screen off, placed it face down, and sat still. I did not look back at the empty seats again. I did not need to. They had made their choice. Now it was time for mine. The ceremony began exactly at 10 o'clock. Music filled the stadium, slow and formal, while rows of graduates stood in sequence, waiting for their names to be called. Around me, students kept turning toward the crowd, waving at their families, smiling when cameras flashed from the stands. Every few seconds, another voice shouted a name with excitement. Another set of parents stood to clap louder than everyone else. I stayed facing forward. Calm, still. The empty seats behind me remained untouched. When my row was finally called, I stood with the others and walked toward the stage in measured steps. The fabric of the gown moving softly against my legs with every stride. On be on. Names echoed through the speakers, followed by applause that rose and faded in predictable waves. Then I heard mine, Emily Carter. I crossed the stage, accepted the diploma with both hands, nodded politely for the photograph, and started to step down. But before I reached the stairs, the voice at the podium spoke again. Emily, please remain on stage. The entire stadium shifted slightly at once, confusion moving through the crowd in small ripples. I stopped where I was and turned back slowly. The principal walked closer to the microphone, holding a second folder, darker than the first, embossed with the district seal in gold across the front. Every year, he said, we recognize one student whose academic achievement, work ethic, and perseverance represent the highest standard of this graduating class. The applause quieted almost immediately. I could hear the faint hum of the stadium speakers overhead and the sound of programs moving in people's hands as they waited. This year, he continued, that student maintained one of the highest grade point averages in school history while working part-time throughout high school and independently funding her education after facing personal hardship. I did not look toward the audience, but for the first time all morning, I heard my last name spoken with respect. Instead of assumption, Emily Carter has been selected as this year's Distinguished Academic Scholar. The stadium erupted. Loud, immediate. Not polite applause this time. Real applause. The kind that rises before people think about it. I accepted the second folder carefully, feeling the weight of it settle into my hands. Inside was a full university grant funded through a statewide academic foundation, enough to cover the remainder of my tuition, housing, and graduate preparation support. Complete independence. Complete ownership of my future. I looked out across the stadium then, just once, thousands of faces, standing applause, and 4 empty reserved seats with my family name printed clearly across them. Carter. For the first time in my life, the emptiness behind me no longer felt painful. It felt honest. I stepped away from the podium slowly while the applause continued around me, louder than before, echoing through the stadium in waves. In my pocket, my phone vibrated once, then again. I did not check it. Not yet. Because at that moment, none of their explanations mattered anymore. They had already shown me exactly who they were, and now the world had seen who I became without them. If you have ever gone through something similar, comment number 1. If you have seen another family treat someone this way, comment number 2. And if you never want to experience a situation like this yourself, comment number 3 or share your own thoughts below. I walked back to my seat holding the folder against my chest, the stadium still applauding behind me, and for the first time in years, I no longer felt invisible. The ceremony began exactly at 10 o'clock. Music filled the stadium, slow and formal, while rows of graduates stood in sequence, waiting for their names to be called around me. Students kept turning toward the crowd, waving at their families, smiling when cameras flashed from the stands. Every few seconds, another voice shouted a name with excitement. Another set of parents stood to clap louder than everyone else. I stayed facing forward, calm. Still, the empty seats behind me remained untouched. When my row was finally called, I stood with the others and walked toward the stage in measured steps, the fabric of the gown moving softly against my legs with every stride. On the bit. Names echoed through the speakers, followed by applause that rose and faded in predictable waves. Then I heard mine, Emily Carter. I crossed the stage, accepted the diploma with both hands, nodded politely for the photograph, and started to step down. But before I reached the stairs, the voice at the podium spoke again. Emily, please remain on stage. The entire stadium shifted slightly at once, confusion moving through the crowd in small ripples. I stopped where I was and turned back slowly. The principal walked closer to the microphone holding a second folder, darker than the first, embossed with the district seal in gold across the front. Every year, he said, we recognize one student whose academic achievement, work ethic, and perseverance represent the highest standard of this graduating class. The applause quieted almost immediately. I could hear the faint hum of the stadium speakers overhead and the sound of programs moving in people's hands as they waited. This year, he continued, that student maintained one of the highest grade point averages in school history while working part-time throughout high school and independently funding her education after facing personal hardship. I did not move. I did not look toward the audience. But for the first time all morning, I heard my last name spoken with respect instead of assumption. Emily Carter has been selected as this year's Distinguished Academic Scholar. The stadium erupted. Loud, immediate. Not polite applause this time. Real applause. The kind that rises before people think about it. I accepted the second folder carefully, feeling the weight of it settle into my hands. Inside was a full university grant funded through a statewide academic foundation, enough to cover the remainder of my tuition, housing, and graduate preparation support. Complete independence. Complete ownership of my future. I looked out across the stadium, then, just once, thousands of faces, standing applause, and 4 empty reserved seats with my family name printed clearly across them. Carter? For the first time in my life, the emptiness behind me no longer felt painful. It felt honest. I stepped away from the podium slowly while the applause continued around me, louder than before, echoing through the stadium in waves. In my pocket, my phone vibrated once. Then again. I did not check it. Not yet. Because at that moment, none of their explanations mattered anymore. They had already shown me exactly who they were, and now the world had seen who I became without them. If you have ever gone through something similar, comment number 1. If you have seen another family treat someone this way, comment number 2. And if you never want to experience a situation like this yourself, comment number 3 or share your own thoughts below. I walked back to my seat holding the folder against my chest, the stadium still applauding behind me, and for the first time in years, I no longer felt invisible